They're always in our homes, whether we are asleep or awake, whether we're at home or away, and whether we're with somebody or on our own. Well, we are never really alone, are we? Living Beside Us, North Dakota, USA, 1950s. Narelle grew up in a small town in North Dakota, USA, and was about 9 or 10 at the time this occurred. At the time, the town had a population of only about 1,000 people. It was here in the 1950s Narelle's parents opened a small family-run grocery shop, which was common in those days, long before the big supermarket chains took over the industry. The building that the grocery shop was set up in has a little bit of a history, but it was said to have been built in the late 1890s. So it was in reasonably good condition and was not that dated. Narelle recalled that the store was small and took up most of the first floor of the premises. The family also lived in this building in the upstairs living areas. Narelle's parents' bedroom was on the first floor just behind the store. Her brothers and sisters shared a bedroom on the second floor, and she shared the other second floor bedroom with her sister. The placement of the building meant that Narelle's room was directly above her parents' bedroom. The move at first into a family-run business seemed good. Business was starting to pick up, and everyone seemed comfortable with the living arrangement. That was, everyone except for one of Narelle's brothers. He was the youngest in the family, and from almost the day they moved in, he was not happy about something. He first spoke about being uncomfortable in the house, and his complaints were dismissed by their parents. They thought it was just the process of moving and change that had affected their youngest child, George. Soon enough, however, George started to have nightmares and would wake up sobbing about the scary monster that visited him at night. But despite the regular comforting from his parents, George's nightmares became more and more frequent. He was young at the time, so he wasn't able to describe what he was experiencing in great detail. But he insisted that whatever was scaring him wouldn't leave him alone at night. One night, Narelle was fast asleep, and she was suddenly awakened by a noise. She opened her eyes and looked around the room, but at first didn't think much of it. Then, as she went to close her eyes to try to get back to sleep, she heard it again. It was a loud thump, and it sounded like it was coming from the floor. She looked around in the dim-lit room confused, and then it happened again, and she realized the thump was directly under her bed. In her mind, she believed it almost sounded like someone was in her parents' room, banging on the ceiling with a broom handle. Narelle lay there, frozen and afraid. The thumping was not regular, but the sound of it grew louder and louder, as if someone was deliberately making the noise to wake her up. Narelle, afraid, called out to her aunt, who was sleeping in the room, but the aunt was fast asleep and didn't wake up. Try as Narelle might, she could not wake her aunt and sat terrified for what felt like ages as a thumping noise came from under the bed. Too afraid to move and too afraid to call out anymore, she just sat there clutching her blanket, terrified, until the thumping stopped. That was not the end of her experience, though. Once the thumping noise stopped, she thought that she might be able to get back to sleep. She was still clutching her blanket tight when suddenly she felt a tug on the blanket that she was holding. Something was trying to pull off the blanket off the end of the bed, and whatever, or whoever it was incredibly strong. All Narelle could do was hold onto the blanket with all her strength. This horrific game of tug-of-war also went on for what felt like forever. But she couldn't hold her grip any longer, and the blanket started to slip out of her grasp. As the last bit of blanket slipped out of her fingers, she froze in total fear. Instead of the blanket being yanked away in one single move, she could see it being slowly dragged further and further down the bed. Slowly, slowly, it edged closer to the foot of her bed, as if being grasped or pulled by something, bit by bit. It was all too much for her now, and Narelle let out a blood-curdling scream. She said it's the loudest she'd ever screamed in her life. The scream woke every single member of the household up, and they all poured into her room to see what had happened. When she told her parents what happened, they first checked under the bed, but they found nothing there. And it was clear no one else had been awoken by or heard the thumping noise earlier on. Narelle's grandmother, on hearing of the happenings, and did not believe in anything like ghosts or monsters, brushed it off as another child's nightmare. Strangely, after this, Narelle never had another experience there, and little George slowly stopped having nightmares. Fast forward many years later to the early 2000s. Narelle's daughter Diana, who was aware of the old shop and building, drove past the property. The last of her family had moved out of the building some 25 years prior, and it was not occupied afterwards. Diana had not heard the story of her mother Narelle's scary experience before this visit. Diana stopped to try to gain access to the property, to see what it looked like inside, and she was able to step inside. The only room she could actually access, though, other than the ground floor, was the room which was supposedly her uncle's room. For a few moments, everything was okay, and her being there was just a visit of curiosity, nothing else. However, it was not long before Diana started to feel cold as a horrible dark feeling came over her. She started to feel as if she couldn't breathe, and even though the day was bright and sunny, she felt as if there was a very strong dark heaviness in the room. She could not stay in that room and had to leave in a hurry as fear started to creep over her. When she next saw her mother, she mentioned what had happened, and that's when Narelle told her about what happened to her in that house as a child. Was there something dark or sinister in that house? Or was it all imagination? Who will know the answers? Hi guys, we need your stories. This show is made up of the real life experiences that have been shared with me over the years. So, if you have ever had a paranormal experience, ghost, alien, weird creatures, whatever, please contact me. seekersosparanormal@gmail.com. Email details in the description. In the hallway. Ocean Springs, Mississippi, USA, circa 1990. Anna was about 7 years old when her dad told her something that never really left her mind. That was that someone had died in their house. He didn't say much more than that. It was just a passing comment, almost casual, but it changed the way that she looked at the place forever. Their house sat deep in the woods, far from any neighbourhoods. No nearby roads and no neighbours within shouting distance. It was more like a small cottage than a real house, with cold concrete floors and beige walls. Whenever her dad left to go get groceries, that's when it started. Anna and her sister would be inside, usually in the living room, where they'd hear knocking. Now, these weren't just random noises, they were real knocks. She described the knocks as being firm and intentional. First they would sound from the front door. Then sometimes they could be heard from the back door of the house. Anna would get up and walk over, her heart pounding, but trying to be brave. She'd open the door, and there would be no one there. No car, no footsteps, just the woods standing silent, staring back at her. This happened more than once, and it only happened when her dad was out. Sometimes, instead of knocking, she'd actually see someone, standing in the hallway. The figure never moved towards her and never spoke a single word. It just stood there, partially in shadow. It was hard to determine how old the figure of the person looked, but it had brown hair, blue eyes, and a yellow dress that stood out against the dull beige walls of the house. Anna didn't remember feeling immediate terror when she saw it, more curiosity and confusion than fear. It was like seeing someone who didn't belong in that place, but also didn't feel aggressive or that it was a threat. She would look at the figure, waiting for them to say something, but they never did. They just stared. And then, just like that, they would be gone. Every time her dad came home, everything stopped. No knocking, no figure, no feeling of being watched. It was like whatever was there only existed in the spaces when he wasn't there. They lived there for a while, but she never learned who that person was, how they died, or why those things happened only when her dad was away. There was no explanation and no logical answer that fit. Even now, Anna still thinks about that mysterious figure in its yellow dress and how it simply stood in the hallway of their quiet house in the woods.
If you'd like to submit your own chilling true tale, so that your story might be featured in one of these episodes, contact me through our website at www.chillingtruetales.com or on email on seekersosparanormal@gmail.com. Email details are in the description. Thanks again for joining me. Until next time.